Hi, in this video, we're going to be talking about federal regulations that affect real estate. And the first one of these is the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Now, the Fair Credit Reporting Act is designed to help protect consumers against inaccurate information in our credit reports. And as consumers, we have the right to inspect our credit reports and then correct any inaccurate information. Now you might ask, how can I check my credit report? Well, the federal government has required the three major credit bureaus to set up a website. It's called annualcreditreport.com, where you can get your free credit report from any of the three major credit reporting agencies. They are Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Now, if a consumer is denied credit, that consumer has to be given the identity of the credit bureau or credit bureaus that provided the information to the lender. Now, the next law we want to talk about is the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, or ECOA. And ECOA prohibits discrimination in the extension of credit by lenders. Now, the protected classes that we'll see in another video in fair housing were actually extended beyond the fair housing protected classes when ECOA was created in the 1970s. ECOA extends protection not only to the protected classes in fair housing of race, color, creed, sex, and national origin, but also to marital status, age, and income from public assistance. So, for example, if I were 90 years old and walked into a bank and said, I want to borrow money on a 30-year loan, they couldn't laugh me out of the building. Or if I were a divorced woman, and back in the 1970s, single women had a great difficulty getting credit. If I were a divorced woman, the fact that I'm divorced would not be able to be a reason for them to deny me credit because of the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And ECOA applies to companies in the lending business. It does not apply to a private lender who might make a loan here and there, and it doesn't apply to seller carryback financing, but banks, savings institutions, credit unions, and mortgage companies all have to abide by ECOA. The next one we want to talk about is the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the ADA requires equal access to public accommodations. Now, what does that mean? What it means is that properties that are open to the public, in other words, business properties, must meet the ADA requirements. And we're familiar with many of these because we're all familiar with handicap bathrooms, handicap parking spaces, ramps going into and out of buildings, and many of the older buildings have had to be renovated in order to meet the ADA requirements, and newer buildings, of course, must be built with the understanding that the ADA requirements are met. So the next time you're in a public restroom or thinking about parking in a handicap space, remember the Americans with Disabilities Act. The next one is the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. This is a federal law that deals with the sale of land across state lines. So anytime land companies are selling property around the country, let's say it's property here in Arizona or property in Florida or wherever, and they're selling it across state lines, they have to provide buyers with what's called a property report. This is a disclosure document. Now, here in Arizona, of course, if you are creating a subdivision, there has to be a public report. But from a federal perspective, if you're selling land across state lines, this Interstate Land Act requires this property report as a disclosure document to buyers. Now, the last one we want to talk about is the Do Not Call registry. We've all received telephone calls from telemarketers that we don't want, and we can try to avoid these by registering through the Do Not Call registry. It's referred to as the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and it's regulated by the FTC. The FTC is the Federal Trade Commission. And this established some national rules about making phone calls. So there's a registry where you and I as consumers can register our phone number, And this registration lasts indefinitely. It doesn't last for just a year or two, it lasts indefinitely. And you can access it through donotcall.gov. Now, all telemarketers, you're real estate agents who are doing some telemarketing, making cold calls, all telemarketers should check the registry. And even if a consumer's phone number is not listed, the law says there can't be any calls before 8 a.m. and no calls after 9 p.m. And of course, these things are often violated. For a period of time, it seemed that there was these rules were being observed. But in recent years, we're talking about now in the late 2017, early 2018, in recent years, there seems to be an abundance of these calls. And part of that is because of the exemptions. Under the law, if you have an existing business relationship with someone, you can contact them. If you have their prior written permission, you can contact them. If it's a political organization, and there's where a lot of calls come from, during election time, they can call you, they're exempt. And nonprofit groups, in other words, charities that are looking to solicit donations, they are all exempt. So here's what you should be aware of. Callers have to access the Do Not Call registry to make sure that the number is not on the Do Not Call list. If you are calling more than 5 different area codes, then there's a registration fee that has to be paid. And the penalties are pretty severe. $16,000 per call is the potential penalty. So be careful. So that does it for our brief discussion on federal regulations.